Hello everybody, and thank you very much for coming, spending money on petrol, risking heat wave and constituting a lovely audience. Thank you very much. I don't think any of us would disagree that colour is an essential feature of the human condition. But in this talk we're going to ask whether the perennial philosophy of wisdom has anything to say about how and what we see in all its colourful glory, and how this relates to what we really are. This phrase, philosophia perennis, was actually coined by Leibniz, who lived from 1646 to 1716, so it's been around a long time. And it was used by the 20th century novelist Aldous Huxley as the title of his anthology of beautiful and memorable writings from East and West to illustrate and elucidate what he called the metaphysics that recognizes a divine reality, substantial to the world of things and lives and minds, so beyond the material. Also, it was a psychology that finds the soul, in the soul, something similar to, or even identical with, divine reality. That is, in the mind and heart. It also meant the ethic that places man's final end in the knowledge of the immanent and the transcendent. In other words, that's tackling the question of what am I here for and who am I? So it is the ground of all being, he said, which is immemorial and universal. And this seems to be an excellent description of the non-dual philosophy which is practiced in all the branches of the school. Cambridge has kindly hosted this talk, but it's the same teaching that's given in London, in other UK branches, and all around the world where people gather together for this inquiry. And the essence of it is practice. That is to say, philosophy is living by wisdom in the light of truth. So we will therefore consider how we see and what we see and from what point of view. This leads to question what or who it is that actually sees, what is real and what we are. We will consider what the investigations of natural philosophers have to say, and ask, in fact, is there any philosophy in colour? Or any colour in philosophy? Is it an important thing, or is it just a pleasant thing? And what actually is colour? If it's merely a deception, or an illusion, or a magic show, what is it for? And how has the human desire for colour driven economic activity and everyday choices? Can colour have a transformative effect on our life? Or do we perhaps consider it as frivolous and unimportant. Now, this school of philosophy, which has kindly provided the opportunity for this present study, was founded on the inspiration of a moment, and that is that truth is something that can be discovered and indeed taught. So 3 or 4 generations of fellow students have since combed through the founding documents of Western and Eastern civilization, not in an academic way, but in order to put them to the test in practical life, as we aspire to find our true and substantial happiness. So it's in this light that we shall proceed. I'm going to change colour now, so you can pass that round. Orange. So, right. Get the picture. So, on to seeing. Now, seeing is one way of connecting with the outside world. What does it involve? 3 factors. Unmistakably, it is the business of the eyes to see. And a great deal of human effort has been spent in discovering what the eyes are made of. Most parts of the eye were first named by Galen of Pergamon during the Imperial Roman era. So he could walk into a Harley Street practice of the most modern ophthalmologist and talk the same language. He was already discussing pupils, iris, cornea, lens, ciliary muscles, aqueous humour, retina, suspensory ligament, conjunctiva, sclera, vitreous humour, fovea, macula, blood vessels and optic nerve. All that was known about. Since then, we've had ever more sophisticated tools used for dissection, magnification, chemical and electrical analysis and so on, revealing rods, cones, neurons, electrical potentials and so on, right down to the cellular and even genetic levels. Also examining the brain as part of the seeing process. But it remains a mysterious process. And in 1952, the scientist Sir Charles Sherrington said in his Man on His Nature, the human eye, we are told, has about 137 million separate seeing elements spread out in the sheet of the retina. A shower of electrical sparks miraculously conjures up the landscape, a friend's face. But themselves, these sparks, have not the faintest elements of the visual. Vertical, horizontal, nor colour, nor brightness, nor shadow, nor roundness, nor squareness, nor contour, nor transparency, opacity, not near, nor far, nor anything at all visual. And as to how, not a word. So where do these notions come from? In fact, none of the scientists' impressive body of experimental information is needed at all for us to be able to see, in the way that a manual of instruction is needed to operate a piece of machinery. It just happens that we wake up in the morning, or whenever, open our eyes and see. So the second factor involved is light. Light of any kind. Sunlight, moonlight, starlight, firelight, electric light. From infrared to ultraviolet, the visible spectrum of light enters the eyes, and lo and behold, we see the world. So the world is the third factor in our experience of seeing. Now this world appears to consist of innumerable separate things, each with its own colour and shape. Perhaps we assume that we all see the same world out there. And yet we cannot literally see through another person's eyes the picture of the world that each has made. Moreover, our view may be coloured by our thoughts, by our feelings, our intentions, and who we think we are. So let us try an experiment using these beautiful surroundings. Take a moment to look around. What can we agree on? Perhaps we're each drawn to some things and not other things. But can we agree that every single thing we see is coloured? That the visual experience gives us pleasure? But did we also perhaps see that we cannot see anything without ideas arising in the mind, commenting on what is seen? Is seeing ever neutral? Some of you may be artists. If you're an artist, you might be ascribing to the colours you see the names of pigments that you might use to render the scene. You might be assessing the objects to select for an interesting composition, or else studying the play of light and shade to be able to mimic 3 dimensions on a flat plane. Now suppose that you're a child who loves running around and climbing trees. Now what do you see? Or suppose that you're a parent or grandparent, very careful of a child's safety. Now what do you see? Suppose you're a town planner, a property developer with housing targets to meet. What do you see now? And how different would it look if you were a thief, a poet, a keen gardener, a historian, a conservationist, an archaeologist, a philosopher? The world we sense, the world represented by the senses and interpreted by the inner organ of mind, belongs to what one scientist has called the relational realm. Even there remains a mystery. This is Donald Hoffman, who wrote in his Visual Intelligence, "Neither biology nor quantum theory dictates the nature of this relational realm that we have through the senses, nor does any other science. Each studies certain phenomena and describes these by precise theories. In no case do the phenomena or the theories dictate the nature of the relational realm." We might as well hope that the theories of science will converge to a true theory of the relational realm. This is the hope of scientific realism. But it is a hope as yet unrealized, and that cannot be proved true. So if seeing is not a reliable guide to what actually is there, and if understanding and interpreting the world is an individual matter, what can we say about colour as a universal experience? Wherever we look, there's no escaping colour. In fact, can you see anywhere where colour is not? Above, below, behind, in front, in the south, in the north, east, west, from the smallest particle to the greatest, colour is all-pervasive, attractive and inviting. It is not just on the outside, but inside everything, permeating everything. Those words might sound familiar to people who may have studied the Upanishads, for example. And this way of characterizing the one self, which is studied in non-dual philosophy, is given almost this exact same description, permeating everything and everywhere. Even if we close our eyes, we still might be seeing dark red, showers of sparks. Colour is completely permeating everything. Let's try another experiment with what we have to hand, literally. Do have a look at your left hand. Its pinky, browny, beige or whatever colour extends over the whole outline of its form. There may be more rosy parts, more bluish parts, darker or lighter sections, nails indicated by change in colour, and possibly rings. And the whole thing is distinct from the textile covering your lap by virtue of their respective colours. In fact, looking around, any object that you care to name has an imaginary line enclosing its apparent shape and colour. Blobs of colour, waiting to be interpreted like an impressionist painting. We note that the colours change depending on the time of day, the season of the year, and also what the neighbouring colours are. And then there are all the illusions of distance, size, optical trickery brought about by colour. It is all there, but only for the time being, as it were. So, we're going to move on. So we come to being. What about being itself? We must admit that everything we see changes, including this hand and the rest of the body which we claim as our own. Not only changes, but actually decays and disappears. And yet we have an unshakable belief that we really do exist. Other orders of being, with their very different outward turning senses, and without our self-reflecting ability, no doubt live in very different worlds. And what about the angels and archangels and all the company of heaven? Or devils, for that matter? What kind of beings are these? And what do they make of our world? Do we perhaps think that these beings do not exist because we cannot see them? They point to a hierarchy of being, which is anathema to modern thinking. But Shakespeare could see them in his mind's eye. What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason! How infinite in faculty! In form and moving, how express and admirable! In action, how like an angel! In apprehension, how like a god! The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. Here, Shakespeare invites us to see ourselves, perhaps, through rose-coloured spectacles of Renaissance humanism. But with bitter irony, Hamlet can see this too, and yet in his blue mood, or black despair, black dog on his shoulder, he can only say, and yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights me not, no, nor woman neither. What is man, if his chief good and marker of his time be but to sleep and feed, a beast no more? So where can we find knowledge of what we really are? We might look into history. This is what the passion of the 19th century was all about, trying to verify things by studying what had happened in the past. And many people remain convinced by Karl Marx's assertion. She said in 1859, he said, "It's not the consciousness of men that determines their being, but on the contrary, their social being that determines their consciousness." He went on to regret that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. That was his view, and a lot of people still think that. But compare this with Carl Gustav Jung's notion. He says, as far as we can discern, the sole purpose of human existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Or again, let's look at Descartes, who used reason to set aside everything that could be doubted, leaving only, I think, therefore I am. We may suppose that the ultimate reality is what really exists, which we'll need to bear in mind when we take a closer look at colour in a moment. For Martin Heidegger spoke about being as a fundamental energy that supports and animates everything that exists. And some of you may have come across Karen Armstrong, in the 20th century. No? Yes? No? Yes. Yes, she had been a nun, and she then made it her life's work to look into what was behind the religions and what was common to them. And she says, being is transcendent. You could not touch it or hear it, but you could watch it at work in people, in objects and natural forces. Not a being, but the ultimate sacred power, impossible to define, limit or describe, because being is all-encompassing, and our minds are only equipped to deal with particular things or beings. And she goes on, one of the conditions of enlightenment has always been a willingness to let go of what we thought we knew in order to appreciate what we never dreamed of. So we might say that the Western analytical project of looking for the ultimate truth of our being in matter has failed, perhaps only leaving us the choice to adopt a cynical wager along with Pascal. 50-50 chance, might as well believe. And it's into this, you could say, spiritual vacuum that the oldest known teaching of reality has come to us, which has been seen both metaphorically and literally by ancient seers or modern seers. It overturns our cherished theories, opinions and beliefs, while satisfying all aspects of our being like no other. And looking back from where we are today, we can see that it has never gone away. But it does take courage and persistence, in other words faith, to come out of what we are not and to become what we really are. Advaita philosophy, which is studied in this school, or non-dual philosophy, asserts that there is only one reality, not two. Now this has huge implications. No duality and no multiplicity. It is the Vedic thesis of creation that the one becomes many for the sake of being known. So, experienced from the point of view of the apparently separate individual, the one self is named Atman, but considered in its universality, this same one self is referred to as Brahman. And because it's infinite, nobody can have the last word. Neither the strident materialist atheists nor the defiant fundamentalist theologians. One embraces all of that. In the Vedic literature there are many beautiful, if puzzling, statements characterizing this self. We will get back to colour. In the Bhagavad Gita, or the Song of the Lord, Krishna, who's realized within himself the identity or identicalness of the individual and the universal self, declares, "I am the seed of all beings." He goes on to say, and he's talking to Arjuna, who's a warrior, and whose charioteer Krishna is acting as. He says, "Whatever is glorious, excellent, beautiful, mighty, be assured that it comes from a fragment of my splendour. And he then gives a vision of divine cosmic form to poor old Arjuna, who finds it totally overwhelming. Elsewhere in these ancient writings, being is described as unmoving, asti, existence, the real substance or substratum, all knowledge, and bliss itself. All forms, what we see, all the expansions and changes within that which exists as the eternal present, which itself doesn't change. And three famous examples are given, which you've probably heard of. That is gold remaining the same, whether it's made into the form of jewellery, rings, whatever, it's all gold. Depends on how you view it. And then there's the famous snake and the rope, which doesn't quite resonate with us because we don't see too many snakes. But if you walk into a dark room and you see an unfamiliar shape, fear arises because you interpret it as something threatening. And of course, when you know that, it completely changes how you view it. One that might be more familiar to us is the wave and the ocean. We use the word wave to define something of a particular shape, but it's momentary. And it's exactly the same water as the ocean. It can't be separate or different. Next colour. Only got a wool one, so this is going to be difficult. So what kind of reality are we talking about when it comes to colour? The ancient teachings tell us that the manifest world exists in name and form only. Name being, of course, language, and therefore the use of the mind and emotions, including colour. Form, including colour, involving the outward turning senses, or as they're called, organs of knowledge. Can we really see in this way? We could fall still now and let the eyes receive colour and form without any comment by the mind, without any sense of identity with the tasks and preferences we may have, and without actually dwelling on the objects of sense, but just receiving colour and form. If it's wisdom and peace that we're after, and not merely gratification of the senses, the dangers of dwelling on the objects of sense is strongly emphasized in Vedic literature. It creates an attraction. Attraction develops into desire. Desire breeds anger. And anger induces delusion. Delusion brings loss of memory, and then reason is shattered, and loss of reason leads to destruction. That comes from the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2. Or again, he who desires nothing but wisdom and spiritual insight, who has conquered his senses, and who looks with the same eye on a lump of earth, a stone, or fine gold, is a real saint. Another one from the same literature. And though the saint sees, hears, touches, smells, moves, sleeps and breathes, yet he knows the truth and knows it is not he who acts. In the light of what Ranko said at the beginning, this presents a real challenge for those of us who love the outward and visible beauty of the world. Viewing the senses as something to be conquered, restrained, banished from the mind, or even, as some writers have said thousands of years ago, poison, actual poison. It's very difficult. Why should one forego this seemingly innocent personal enjoyment? It seems like a serious deprivation. And yet, we are assured by a 20th century sage who's generously given hours and hours of conversation sharing his understanding with the founder of this school. He says that no deprivation is intended. It is just that our ego gets in the way. He said in 1982, speaking of the microcosm and the macrocosm, the divine world and the divine beings reside in each individual body as well as in the universe, and they are ever ready to offer whatever is necessary for the individual. The organs of knowledge, the senses, or action, are the embodiment of divine forces. The eyes embody the sun and the moon, and without their help, nothing can be seen. Creative paintings are the result of regulated use of vision, and a bonus from the divine forces. He tells us that seeking favour from divine forces somewhere outside oneself arises from the ignorant view that they are not within oneself, these divine forces. They would of course remain remote if one thinks of oneself as the doer. And he says ego expels divinity, so that any disparity between our thoughts, words and actions locks out the divinity from one's everyday life. And he says, if we do not see the Supreme Self everywhere in the vast field of creation, and do not see its sweetness, and are not filled with joy by it, then we really see nothing at all, and then our philosophical practice lacks weight. It would be very nice to give more examples of the wisdom in the Vedas and also the Upanishads and the Judeo-Christian sources. And there's a lovely Buddhist parable of the painters and the story of Lycomedes and the Hermetic writings and Plotinus and Master Eckhart. We could go on and on. All of them emphasize the outward image and the inward reality. There may be time at the end for some of those. But one thing we can ask ourselves that may be useful, and that is, am I seeing in colour right now? The senses only operate in the present, and we are strongly encouraged to stay in the present moment and to disregard all the random thoughts that come into the mind and may also be clamouring to influence the way we act, think and behave. We can ask what thoughts are revealed as being entertained by the mind when we perceive in colour. It will show this up. Are there personal theories, opinions, beliefs, tastes, preferences, and identifications? These may cut us off from seeing the full glory of the present moment. And also, what desires or intentions are revealed as we consume colours and produce them. So I shall next talk about desire for colour and what it does to us. Perhaps blue is the wrong colour for desire, but never mind. So finding ourselves in a world teeming with colour, we've from time immemorial delighted in our perception and have tried to reproduce these colours. The colours of the earth and the sky, fire, water, flowers and vegetation and so on in our everyday surroundings. And in attempting to find materials that are capable of producing lasting colours, we may be trying to fix the light that is the source of all life on Earth. So coloured minerals, earths and ochres have been used by all civilizations. We need plenty of ochre at the moment, seeing how the fields are. These have been available from iron oxides as well as manganese oxides and charcoal black, used for body and wall decorations, as well as the tanning of hides and the preservation of food. And the colouring of cloths uses dyes, is soluble compounds suspended in a medium. And they took, for example, carbon-based plants or animal extracts, such as the seeds of weld for yellow and mollusks for murex purple. And it was in large part this demand that called into being travel and trade. So to the earth reds and yellows of prehistory, the ancient Egyptians added dark and light blues from cobalt, copper salts, and ground lapis lazuli, and green from malachite, and many yellows from arsenic trisulfide and sulfates of iron, potassium and sodium. Then, as inheritors of the Greek and Roman civilization, the vast territories of the Roman Empire carried on their use in murals and textiles. They decreed that only the imperial family could wear purple. And after the Roman Empire became Christianized in the 4th century, this sumptuary law continued for high liturgical dress. And the wealthy sought bright, colour-fast, heraldic colours, in contrast to the natural dull clothing of hemp, wool and linen worn by the crowd. The palette of colours broadened considerably in the Middle Ages, and as well as substances used in antiquity, many new pigments and dyes were created, better adapted to the new supports used in painting and other art forms. And the great international textile industry of Europe stimulated the quest for new colours, which continued on into the 16th century with rising living standards. And then the great sea explorers aimed to trade directly with the mythic countries that produced not only spices but colorants, so they could avoid the tolls and taxes by intermediaries on the land routes. Then the animal, vegetable and mineral sources of colorants, experimented on by dyers, chemists and alchemists, played a huge part in the colonial conquests and European wars of the modernising era. For a long time, applied research chemists tried to isolate and characterise the principles of dyeing, and in the 19th century they began to succeed, with vast possibilities from chemical synthesis, which overwhelmed the colorant market. And the large-scale agricultural production of pigments dominated the world market. England dominated the world market. But then the synthetic dyes took over. But even this was eclipsed by the great German industrial companies in the early 20th century. And after the First World War, German patents for dyes were acquired as spoils of war to stimulate their own industries. Synthetic indigo remains the world's most popular colour, especially for work clothes. And the industrial practice of tinting foodstuffs is also now widespread to make up for the loss of colour in processing and packaging. So countless new organic and mineral compounds are being made. And computer technology with high-resolution screens and colour printers claims to offer millions of colours. So we may be losing our intimate connection with the materiality of colour and its perception by the senses. Virtual colours are just coded information, excluding any possibility of an emotional relationship with the materials themselves.
Sorry. It's getting gory. Is that all right?
So we're talking about the enigma of colour and its behaviour, which attracted the attention of great scholars and philosophers for thousands of years. Plato wouldn't have painters in his ideal state. Lies about lies and all that. But nevertheless, apparently, according to Alberti, the Renaissance polymath, he was himself quite a good painter. And so were Socrates and Aristotle. Aristotle and all the natural philosophers who followed initially investigated colour as a means of discovering the divine. In his treatise on colour, Aristotle, observing that sunlight passing through or bouncing off an object is always reduced in intensity, he viewed colour as a material property of objects. And this view held right up to the time that Newton was able to bend white light through a prism so as to produce a spectrum of colours, from red, which is the least bent, through orange, yellow, green, blue, to violet, the most bent. And now colour could be seen as a property of light. Nevertheless, it's very interesting to note that Newton pointed out in his optics. Have a drink first. Sorry. This is Newton. Whenever I seem to speak of radiation or rays, coloured or imbued with colour, I should like it so expressed that it does not sound philosophical or special, but intelligible to the general public. Since those ideas are accepted, which people, watching experiments of this kind, can themselves comprehend. Indeed, properly expressed, rays are not coloured. There is nothing else in them but a certain power or disposition which so conditions the rays that they produce in us this or that sensation of colour. And despite what he said, this wavelength theory of light and colour was firmly established in the 18th century, when physics and measurement predominated in intellectual life. Obviously he had his detractors, and there's Sir John Leslie of the Scottish Enlightenment, who said in his treatise on various subjects of natural and chemical philosophy, when Newton attempted to reckon up the rays of light decomposed by the prism, he was apparently influenced by some lurking disposition towards mysticism. If any unprejudiced person will fairly repeat the experiment, he must soon be convinced that the various coloured spaces which paint the spectrum slide into each other by indefinite shadings. He may name 4 or 5 principal colours, but the subordinate spaces are evidently so multiplied as to be incapable of enumeration. He says, the same illustrious mathematician, we can only doubt, was betrayed by a passion for analogy when he imagined that the primary colours are distributed after the proportions of the diatonic scale in music, since those intermediate spaces have no precise and definite limits. Now, I think that's really interesting. So here we have a scientist and a rationalist denigrating the lurking disposition towards mysticism. It's like an admission that science can measure things, but it can't tell us everything. And the passion for analogy, what are we going to say about all the philosophical stories that work by analogy? What are we going to say about the parables that teach? We have a huge, rich heritage of teaching stories, parables, and metaphors in all traditions which allude to a higher reality by means of the experience of our common life and our sensual life. I was pleased to see that. So that helps in a way with this accommodating to the polarity between inward and outward and the place of it all. So we moved from justifying the ways of God to man to denying him any role at all in the scheme of things, as far as the scientific measuring attitude is concerned. And whilst we have Newton to thank for naming the red, orange, yellow, blue, green, blue, indigo, violet sequence, it's to Goethe that we turn for the presentation of colours in a circle. Now, as a playwright and a theatrical director, he studied the arts and colour phenomena for many years and presented his findings initially as a contribution to optics, which he elaborated in his Doctrine of Colours in 1810. He violently objected to Newton, which he saw as focusing on secondary phenomena. But he did realise that he was stepping into a great controversy. He said, "From time immemorial it has been dangerous to treat of colour. So much so that one of our predecessors ventured on a certain occasion to say, 'The ox becomes furious if a red cloth is shown to him, but the philosopher, who speaks of colour only in a general way, begins to rage.'" Nevertheless, Goethe did feel that his eyes would be welcomed. He said, "From the philosopher, we believe we merit thanks for having traced the phenomena of colour to their first source, to the circumstances under which they simply appear and are, and beyond which no explanation respecting them is possible." Goethe also thought that his work would be appreciated by the medical practitioner, the investigator of nature, the chemist, the practical dyer, and the artist. For the artist, he thought, finds little direct application to the arts in Newton, whereas the principle of contrast, universally exhibited in nature, greatly preoccupied Goethe, along with the aesthetic application of contrast and gradation. All nature, he said, manifests itself by means of colours to the sense of sight. We now assert, extraordinary as it may in some degree appear, that the eye sees no form, inasmuch as light, shade, and colour together constitute that which to our vision distinguishes object from object, and parts of an object from each other. From these three, light, shade, and colour, we construct the visible world, and thus at the same time make painting possible, which is an art that has the power of reproducing on a flat surface a much more perfect visible world than the actual one. Now it's interesting to compare this view with the ancient Vedic teachings about the 5 great elements of earth, fire, water, air or wind, and space, each with its corresponding sense of smell, sight, taste, touch, and hearing. Colour, harmony, and contrast can also be used to illustrate other great laws or principles. For example, pairs of opposites, dark, light, the law of 3, where 2 opposites can be resolved by a third point to give harmony and balance, or the idea of attention and the acknowledgement of intention. Leon Bakst, in the 20th century, the stage costume designer for the Ballet Russe, was also strongly aware of the power of colour. And he said, "I've often noticed that in each colour of the prism there exists a gradation that sometimes expresses frankness and chastity, sometimes sensuality and even bestiality, sometimes pride, sometimes despair." And he also succeeded conspicuously in manipulating the public with these effects. So society ladies quickly incorporated his exotic hues into their dress and makeup. So much more could be said about colour as information. Heraldic colours, liturgical colours, monastic colours, colours in dress, decoration, furnishing, advertising. But it should be borne in mind that colour symbolism varies over time and place. And we just don't have time to look at colour terminology slippery. So I want to show you you will have come across the grey scale, and it's normally presented in a straight line with light at one end and dark at the other end. But to try and show it as a universal concept of light and dark, I've painted this ball which shows dark to light. And you can pass that round if you like. You'll notice, by the way, that where they join, something else has happened. So have a look, because it's not smooth. Now, some years ago, when I was teaching at the Art Academy, I was taking early amateur artists who just came to do an evening class, and I wanted to be able to show that you could incorporate the polarity with the colour hues. So, mainly using tube paints and not mixing, I put the colours of the spectrum round the edge, Goethe style. And what you immediately notice is that the yellow is the lightest of all the colours. So if this is the light half and that is the dark half, yellow is out of place really, belongs much higher up. Or you want darker versions of yellow. That can go wrong. So I came up with another one where I tried to using mixing of colours. So not all blues with not all reds will produce a lovely purple. The painters among you will no doubt have found that out. So on this one I've tried to adjust the colour so that it's nearer, but it still doesn't work perfectly. So you can have a look at that. I don't think you need that one. So we're on to magenta. It's coming to the end, folks. Okay. So I want to show you the great universal colour ball and see how it relates to philosophy. If I can get away with this. This is work in progress, because you do notice that you can, like musicians can train their ear to hear pitch, and artists can train their eye to see ever a finer distinction. And having grown up in the Thames estuary, I was very aware of when it was that the sea was darker than the sky, or the sky was dark as the sea, and there must be a point where they're exactly the same for them to cross over. And being able to appreciate these fine distinctions. And you could say, well, you know, here I've used a much darker yellow on the circumference and tried to put them on the map. So you could say that any conceivable colour is on the map somewhere. It must be. You must be able to get it there. And you've got the poles of light and dark. There may be Sanskrit buffs in the audience, but as I understand it, the word for creation is not our way of thinking of creation. It is an outward movement from a single point. My husband's nodding, he knows Sanskrit. Good. I want you to picture yourself right at the centre of this ball and see what colour it would be, if any, and then to imagine that creation is moving outwards in all directions. So you've got the three great forces represented by blue, by yellow, and by red. And those are acting in creation. But right at the centre, what is there? At the central point that all the other things come from. That's where black is. Black's on the outside. It's not at the centre.
Black contains all colours though, doesn't
It does, yes. Well, that's something to consider, isn't it? I mean, if we're in the world of duality, we've got black one end and white the other end. If we're in the world of three forces, we've got our red, our blue and our yellow interacting to make all the ones in between. Right in the middle, there's no movement at all. And it's not a void of emptiness. It's a void full of potential. Moving outwards, it becomes all this. So that's my symbol for philosophy in colour. And I'll just say that the study of practical philosophy, or the philosophy of unity, can make a deep impression. It enables the resolution of apparent opposites by reference to the greater whole. It emphasizes the value of being fully in the present, using all our faculties with attention and being aware of one's intention. It helps to remove the limitations and impediments to a happy and useful life. And it shows that if we see all that's provided to us in creation as coming from and indeed manifesting one source, which is benign, then we may enjoy both the outward-facing senses, bringing us all the world's colourful glory, but also the profound stillness and peace within, and we need both. So, thank you very much.